Okay, normally if I was going to ask you to solve these equations by factoring, we would normally start by getting 0 on one side. And I'm going to tell you right now, don't, because that'll actually screw up what we're trying to do. So on these two problems, we are going to, for now, ignore that the right side says 100. We are going to work on factoring this left side. So we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 64 and add up to negative 16. If they're adding up to a negative, then there has to be at least one negative, but because they're multiplying to be positive, that means they both have to be negative. So two negative numbers that multiply to 64 and add up to negative 16. Negative 8 and negative 8, which means the factored form is x minus 8 times x minus 8. And we can write that as x minus 8 squared. Okay, let's finish solving this and then I'll help you see what the connection is in a second. We would solve this using square roots. Don't forget a plus minus. What is the square root of 100? 10. So x minus 8 equals positive or negative 10. Add 8 to both sides, and you get 8 plus or minus 10. Because those are both regular, real, whole numbers, you can do 8 plus 10 to get 18, 8 minus 10 to get negative 2. The reason that we were able to factor the left side without getting 0 on one side is that the left side was already a perfect square trinomial. In a perfect square trinomial, there is a connection between this number, negative 8, the middle number, negative 16, and the third number, 64. Does anybody see the relationship between negative 8, negative 16, and positive 64? Yes. Negative 8 times 2 is negative 16. Negative 8 squared is positive 64. So in a perfect square trinomial, and I'm actually going to kind of rewrite this as x plus b squared, it's x squared plus 2bx plus b squared. So this middle number is 2 times whatever number is in your parentheses, and the third number is that number from the parentheses squared. This is called a perfect square trinomial because you take a binomial, square it, and it becomes this trinomial from the perfect square. So it's a perfect square trinomial. So on this second one, if we ignore the 81 for right now and just focus on this, what number times 2 is 22? 11, and 11 squared is 121. So this would factor into x plus 11 squared equals 81, and then we could solve this using square roots. The first part of your assignment today is just like this, where the left side already is a perfect square trinomial. The right side you'll just ignore until you have factored the perfect square trinomial. Square root both sides. The square root of 81 is plus or minus 9. So negative 11 plus or minus 9. That means our solutions are negative 11 plus 9 is negative 2. Negative 11 minus 9, negative 20. Okay, before we get into true completing the square, I want you to practice finding the number that creates a perfect square trinomial. So in this second set of examples, we need to figure out what C needs to be in order for this to become a perfect square trinomial. You start in the middle. What number times 2 is 14? 7. Take 7 and square it. 49. C would have to be 49. Then this would factor into x plus 7 squared. You don't need to do that last step. I just want you to see that once you have a perfect square trinomial, it factors perfectly into a binomial squared. Number 6, start with this 8. What number times 2 is 8?
4.
4. 4 squared is?
16.
So C would have to be 16. 7 is honestly a little bit tricky. What number times 2 is negative 2?
1.
Negative 1. Negative 1 squared.
1.
Positive 1. Try 8 on your own. 2 times negative 5 would be negative 10. Negative 5 times itself would be positive 25. Okay, now we've learned what we need to add to make a perfect square trinomial. Now let's actually solve by completing the square. If I asked you in number 9 to factor, you need two numbers that multiply to give you 7 and add up to negative 10. Those numbers don't exist. This is not factorable. So this 7 is very inconvenient. It makes this not factorable, so I'm going to move it to the other side. How do we move a number to the other side?
-7.
You subtract 7 on both sides. So I have x squared minus 10x blank equals negative 7 blank. We're leaving the blanks because we're going to be sticking something in those blanks. Okay. Now this is kind of like number 7. We need to know what number do we need to stick in here to create a perfect square trinomial that we can factor. So what number times 2 is negative 10? Negative 5. What is negative 5 times itself?
25.
Positive 25. Now, if I just add 25 to one side of the equation, an equation is supposed to be balanced. So if I add 25, now the equation is totally unbalanced. How do I rebalance it? Add 25 on the other side as well. So once you figure out that 25 is the number, add 25 to both sides. The left side is now going to factor into x minus 5 squared. Okay, whatever number you figured out, that 2 times whatever, and then you squared that number, that's the number that you put in the binomial squared. On the right side, negative 7 plus 25, help me out with my simple math.
14.
14.
That's 8.
You know, 18, 14, 18. It's like the same thing, really. You know.
Yeah.
Whew. Okay, now we know how to solve this because we did this last week. We need to square root both sides. Don't forget your plus minus. So x minus 5 equals positive or negative. What do we need to do with the square root of 18? We need to simplify it into the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. What is the square root of 9?
3.
So plus minus 3 square root of 2. Is that my answer? What do we need to do for our last step? Add 5. So 5 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. Number 10. Again, if you tried to factor this, the only way that you can multiply to get 5 is 1 times 5. You're definitely not going to add up to negative 18 using 1 and 5. So that 5 is problematic. Let's move it to the other side. So we have x squared minus 18x blank equals negative 5 blank. If I've decided that I'm going to solve by completing the square, you know that you're going to have to add something to both sides, put those blanks in, give yourself space for it. When you are completing the square, you want to focus on the middle number, negative 18. What number times 2 is negative 18? Negative 9. So right now, you could write down x minus 9 squared directly underneath that. Whatever number you figure out is half of that middle number, that's what's going to go into your binomial squared. Square that number. Negative 9 times negative 9 is positive 81. That is what you add to both sides. Okay. Negative 5 plus 81 is 76, correct? All right. See, I can do simple math. I can, I promise. Sometimes. Now we're ready to square root in order to solve. Square root both sides. Don't forget your plus minus. Some of you like to simplify the square root of 76 right underneath here. Personally, I like to take this over to the side just so I feel like I have more room. Let's see. 76 divided by 36, I think that's a decimal. Not 25, not 16, not 9. 4 and 19. So 2 times the square root of 19. 2 square root 19. All right, I'm done, right? No. Add 9 to both sides. 9 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 19. All right, should we pick 11 or 12 to do? Let's do 11. I think I did 12 last hour, so let's do 11 this hour. Try number 11 on your own. Go for it. Pause the video. I mean it. Pause the video. I don't think you've paused it yet. You need to pause the video and try number 11. Do it. First thing we need to do is move the 11 over to the other side. So I would have x squared minus 4x blank equals, oh hey, we need to subtract 11 on both sides. I kind of, there we go. So x squared minus 4x blank equals 3 minus 11. And there's still going to be a blank. So that is the one difference between 9, 10, and 11 and 12. You're already going to have a number on the right side, so you will have to combine those two numbers. All right, so let's see. I need to figure out what number times 2 is negative 4. That would be negative 2. That number squared is positive 4. Oh, hey, it's really good we did this one. This factors into x minus 2 squared equals negative 4. We then need to square root both sides. And you are no longer in Algebra 1, so you can do the square root of negative numbers. The square root of negative 4 is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4. That would be plus or minus 2i. Add 2 to both sides. Our final answer is 2 plus or minus 2i.